Let's move on to the next talk, which is also the last one of the day, by Jérôme Petit. Millimeter rotational lines as powerful diagnostics of the physical condition of the molecular gas.
Yes, so after this nice introduction to multibeams, I will show what we could do. Part of what we could do with a multibeam at 3 millimeter, for instance, at the IRAM 30 meter. So this is a work. This is the work I'm leading with Maëvan Gérin, and this is the work of the consortium. So I've put the name of the people. In red are the young people. Well, there is me. I'm not so young, but and then in green are the ones for which I will discuss the work. Okay, so the OrionB project is trying to shed light on star formation and the link with its host parents, including dynamics, physics, and chemistry. And in order to do this, we thought that we would try to build an unbiased survey with tracers of all components of the host parents, all molecular components of the host parents, over 5 square degrees in the OrionB cloud. So 5 square degrees is 18 times 13 parsecs. And the typical resolution of the 30 meter at 3 millimeter will be 26 arcseconds or 50 milliparsecs at the distance of Orion. So in one image, in each of those images, you have typically 1 million pixels. But in fact, what makes this dataset quite unique is the fact that we are not having one image, but we are having 80. We are having we are sampling 40 gigahertz at 200 kilohertz resolutions, and this gives 240,000 images. So to give you an idea, at 40 images per second, it makes a movie of 2 hours 45. So how we're doing this, we are having the 1 pixel EMIR detector that covers 2 times 8 gigahertz, and we are doing the 3 different setups that you see here. And the typical noise level you see is evolving like this. As has been said by Philippe, when you have such a large number of images, the noise is the sensitivity is limited, and so you have lots of noise. But you still, in our data sets, you still have 1,000 channels where there is data on a large number of pixels. And in fact, if you're logging it at the cores, then you get a much larger number of channels where there is signals, okay? Just because there is much more matter on it. And so the question is how to make this data set speak. And fortunately, we have modern statistical methods that allow us to explore high-dimensional data. And as star formation is statistical questions, the fact that you have many different pixels completely sampled will help us. So I will describe a bit of the work that has been done. The first one is trying to just to trace the amount of gas along the line of sight. So you know that trying to trace cold H2 directly is impossible because H2 is a symmetrical molecule. And so we need to rely on tracers. So there are different kinds, thermal emission from dust. But if we want to go in the far infrared, we need space telescopes, and this has been a big success of Herschel. And the other possibility that has been used for a very long time is to use tracer like CO. So here I'm showing the virial mass as a function of the CO luminosity for an ensemble of galactic and extragalactic targets, and you see that you have two first order good correlation. But in fact, the difficulty is that if we're looking at the Orion B data, we see that between AV and the luminosity of CO, you have a relation that is not as linear. You have different linear relationships here, and you have saturation at high column densities. And but with a data set like this, we don't have just one line, so we have tens of lines that are detected at the same time. And the question is whether we can do better. And in fact, Pierre Gratier have shown by doing a principal component analysis that the first of the intensities of the different lines, that the first principal component is very well correlated with the column density and without saturation. So what is PC1 is just a linear combination of the intensities of the different lines. So this means that going from one line to many lines at the same time, you avoid the saturation effect. So the question then is whether it's possible to get more quantitative and to have a quantitative relationship between this combinational line and NH2. And the classical way of doing this, well, the recent way of doing it is to try to use machine learning methods. And we are trying to use random forest. So I don't have time to go into details, but what I'm showing here is the dust, the column density estimated from the dust from Herschel, measured from Herschel. And here is what the XAO method would predict as column densities. And here is the ratio between the two, okay? So this is for the XAO methods. Now, if you're using a PCA method, assuming that everything is linear, like this one, then you get this results. So you see that here it's the ratio of the two, and this is the same scale, so you get a much better result. But in fact, if you're using random forest, then you achieve a result that is extremely good. And this is maybe more quantitative here. I'm showing the histogram of those, this image and the top and the bottom image, and you see that you don't have so much bias anymore when you're using random forest. So just to add, this data set, the Orsted, has not been, the machine learning method have not been trained on these data sets, okay? This is just the application. We use the reminder of the data and we applied it on our set. So just to show that these machine learning methods can deliver an accurate estimate of the column density. But there are more. In fact, we can try to understand what's going on and first to see what which line contribute more to the result. And here I'm showing the quality of how the result improve as a function of the number of lines by adding lines. Okay, and so you see that this is on average, and this is the maximum error. And you see that at the fifth line, you have the impression that you don't improve anymore anything. The first four lines, sorry, are the CO is autopolog and HCO plus, and with random forest, in addition, you can say what the line intensity is contributing to the column density for each pixels. So here you see that 13CO120 is contributing positively where the Orsted, when the dense gas is, and negatively to where there is not so much matter, where it's diffuse and H2 regions. So negatively means negative compared to the mean value. If you're looking at 12CO, you see that it will have an impact on the diffuse regions and at the edges of the ORCED. If you're looking at C18O, you see that it will have an impact on very dense regions. And if you're looking at HCO+, it will have an impact mostly at transition regions between dense and H2 regions. So this is the global behavior, but in fact, this is not the full story, because if you're looking at dense cores where N2H+ emits, so here I'm showing the same decomposition, but in histograms. So this is the contribution of 13CO as a function of the visual extension. So you see negative for low visual extension, positive contributions to the column density for high visual extensions. But in fact, if you're looking at H2H+, you see that it does not contribute at all. In no informations when you have low extension, but a large content of information when you have when you are at high visual extension. So saying that only those lines are important is true only on average. On some regions that are very important to understand star formations in N2H+, and so minor lines that are not always detected are become very important. So the question next is why CO isotopologues can be used to deduce the column density. In fact, people always so often do a simple reasoning. They say, okay, CO isotopologues, they have the same structure, so they must have geometry that is similar. The radiative transfer property are similar, the H10 coefficients, energy, and so on. So just by looking at those microphysics properties, we would have the impression that the line ratio should be the simple probes of elemental carbon, abundance of carbon and oxygen. And people, in fact, in nearby galaxies are trying to estimate the progress of stellar nucleosynthesis by measuring the ratio of the CO isotopologues. But in fact, this image, which is a three-color image of the three CO isotopologues, tell you that it's not true. In Orion B, there is no reasons why the elemental abundance should vary from one side to the other. So if the ratio of the CO isotopologues is proportional to the elemental fraction, then you should have a uniform color image, which is not the case here. So this reasoning is too simple, and the question is why is it too simple? And can we understand it? And in order to do this, the first things we need is to invert the radiative transfer. So with the Antoine Roueff, we have used local thermodynamic equilibrium. And the difficulty we have when we have many pixels, thousands here, there are tens of thousands of pixels, is to be able to invert the radiative transfer in a robust way, in a robust blind way, okay? And in the conditions where the signal-to-noise ratio is limited. And Antoine proposed to use a tool of information theory that is called Kramer-Rao bounds that tells you from the LTE model and the model of the noise when you can or you cannot invert your problems. And so with this method, you have an automated quality assessment of your inversion. So with this, we can have we can plot the excitation temperature of 13CO and C18O and 12CO as function of each other only for the pixel for which we have a good inversions. And we see that while for 13CO and C18O, we have approximately the same excitation temperature, this is not at all the case when you're adding 12CO. And this is important in extragalactic studies because people in general assume the same excitation temperature between 12 CU and 13 CU, and this will bias the column density you will deduce. More than this, we can also estimate the abundances. So here I'm showing the column density of 13 CU as a function of C18O and 12 CU as a function of 13 CU. And if it was the if the ratio was the elemental reflecting the elemental abundance, you should have 8 or something like 8 here and 60. So you see that it's not true at all. And the reason why is that there are chemistry going on in the isotopologue. So first, in diffuse gas, you have chemical fractionation. But you have also a selective photodissociation between 13 CU and C18O. And in the very dense gas, the CO will deplete and not as fast for the different isotopologues. That's why even though those molecules seem very similar, they are able to differentiate different kind of gas, more or less dense gas. So this was about the column densities. But we also try to say things about the star formation process, which is a dynamic process. And so Jan Orkits, during his PhD, has tried to characterize the filamentary structure in Orion B. So here, this is the optical image. Here, 12 CU image. And here are the filament structure that Jan has extracted. So the question behind is, what is the role of gas filament in star formation process, and are filament characteristic universals? So this has been the first study for which there has been many different filaments detected. And why it's not so easy, it's because they have low contrast compared to the background. And so it's not so easy to detect them. But they are everywhere. And once you have detected them, you can characterize them, in particular the linear density and their velocity widths, and from this you can deduce the gravitational stability criterions. And we see that in Orion B, most of the filaments are stable, except in NGC 2023 and 2023, that is here, and NGC 2024, which are the regions where there is star formation. We need to correlate this with the fact that Orion B is the GMC in the Gould Belt survey that has the less star formation efficiency compared to the other ones. So this is this goes in the same directions. Okay, we see that the filaments are mostly stable.
It's written from time to time things like to be seen in next holography. You are with someone? Oh, yes.
Okay. I think this is Arantxa, maybe, or Roberto. Okay. So the last piece of information I want to give is the fact that Mathilde Godel, the postdoc working with us, has been trying to, now that we have the filaments, I've been trying to understand the kinematic around those filaments, because the question is how the gas is converging or diverging to the filaments. And in fact, she has been with a complex, the paper is submitted, so it's not easy in 2 minutes to explain how we are doing this, but focusing in two different filaments, one which is as a source of the flame NGC 2034, which is very well defined and relatively isolated compared to H2 regions, and the filaments that are at the edge of IC344, which is the old-age H2 regions, and that is in fact creating the Ørsted pillar. We have very different kinematics, and when we're trying to model, it's possible to show that the behavior we see in the flame filament is compatible with inflow of the gas, surrounding gas to the filaments, while for the filaments that are here, it's more compatible with the compression due to the H2 regions that is still pushing. So, okay, this is what can be done from science, and the question is whether, yes, the question is whether we can, what can we do in the future, and this has been introduced by Christophe. And so, just to tell you that with 1 pixel, we mapped 5 square degree in less. Typically, I'm taking order of magnitude. That's why I'm saying 1,000 hours, but this project was 850 hours, and with a sensitivity of 100 milli-K. And now with the next generation of multi-beam, with the sensitivity, we will be able to do 125 square degrees. So this is a fair fraction of the galactic plane. So we start to be to sample the galactic planes. And if the current field of view of the 30 meter is of the order of 10 arc minutes square, and so if we're trying to fill it, we need 370 pixels, and so we would be able to do much better than the galactic planes. And I'll put this number because for Atlas that will be speak, I've heard that the field of view will be 2 degrees. So I took 1 degree just as an example. And then if you're filling it with multi-beams, you need 10,000 pixels. And then, but then in the same hour, in same amount of times and sensitivity, you are able to map the full sky. And of course, the sensitivity is not great, as you said. You would get lots of noise, but in fact, the other way of using the sensing is to use the same number of square degrees, so a fair fraction of the galactic planes, and using just the fact that you will, the pixels will, many pixels will see the same fraction of the sky, and you will be able to reach much better sensitivity. And so to finish, this is to say that this is the sensitivity, this is intensity, and this is 1 pixel over the 3 millimeter band with a sensitivity of 5 milli-K. So if you're looking at 5 sigma, you have the red curves, and if you're looking at 10 sigma, you have the green curves. So just saying that going from 0.1 Kelvin sensitivity to 5 milli-K makes a huge difference, and you have much less noise. You start to see many more lines. So there is a bright future for multi-beams.
Thank you, Jérôme. There is a question by Claudia.
So very interesting talk. Thank you. I'm very excited about this column density estimate method, especially for environments for which we know nothing about the alpha CO, because we don't know about the metallicity, and the large velocity gradients can make even 12 CO optically thin. So how stable is this for such environments if we don't know anything about abundances or optical depth?
So we can, in the paper, we give a method to state, if you have the data, to state whether the method is reliable or not first, okay? And if the method is reliable, you get, say otherwise, if your intensities are in the right input space, you will get the right accuracy, okay? The question is whether these methods will not apply, for instance, to low metallicity environments or not. The method trained on these data sets, but then we could train it on other data sets and then try to generalize. Another thing that we are trying to do is to understand how it works, the chemistry and the radiative transfer. So, and if we succeed, let's see, then we'll have a much better way of inverting this for many different environments.
Yeah, and so a related question was, can we, so if we only have 4 lines, can we replace the higher density one that in your case is HCO plus with CN or HCN, or they don't have the same?
We didn't explore this, but
because CN is much closer to CO.
This is linked to our current effort to try to understand what is important in doing this.
Merci, Jérôme, for this presentation. I have a question about you talk about stability in NGC 223 and 224. I was a bit surprised that you said that those are the regions which are unstable. Did I understand correctly? So, because it's the regions where you have the B stars. So I was a bit surprised.
So NGC 2023 and NGC 2034 are the regions where there are the most cores and YSOs currently, even though there is plenty of B and H2. And probably my feeling is that the H2 region at start is injecting energy in the cloud, making a second generation of stars before completely destroying the clouds.
Yeah, this is the triggered star formation idea, which is very often put forward, but no, not really, because I don't understand how injecting energy helps forming stars. It's a counterintuitive thing.
We are waiting that infrared astronomers show us the answer.
Yes. No, but Jérôme, maybe you can tell what is the criterion? What is it based on for your stability criterion? What is changing in the gas that makes this criterion tell you that it's unstable?
This is just the linear mass and the dispersion of velocity.
But you don't have the temperature of the gas in this criterion.
The temperature is happening also, yes, but in fact we are still dominated by the turbulence. The temperature is not playing well. It can be discussed, but in fact we did it with just the temperature and with temperature and turbulence, and I'm showing you the version with temperature and turbulence, and this is the one I'm showing you. So we have both effects.
Merci.
Okay, so thank you very much to all the speakers of this afternoon session, and this will end today's.
Moi, j'avais une question pour Jérôme, si c'est encore possible. Yes.
Go on. I didn't see you.
I raised my hand, but it doesn't matter.
I don't see the Zoom. I only see the doc online.
Okay, no worry. I should follow the rules. I'm sorry. Jérôme, I have 2 questions. The first one is about, I want to understand why 12CO and 13CO make a negative contribution. I don't understand the meaning of a negative contribution.
So it's because this method is working, well, the analysis of the method is working around the mean a mean column density. So you start with a column density of I don't know, 10 to the 21, something like that, probably a bit more. And the lines contribute more or less to this compared to this average. Is that clearer? No.
Well,
wait a minute. Here
yeah,
you can decompose the column density as the log of n0 plus the contribution of the lines. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this contribution can be positive or negative.
But what does it mean physically that it is negative?
No, it's the logarithm that is negative. So it's decrease.
Oh, you mean okay, yeah, it's
okay.
a logarithm which is negative.
Okay.
So you're just lowering the contribution.
Exactly.
You need a lower.
It's the logarithm. Sorry, I should have been clearer.
But yeah, it's me. And then my second question is it available as your random forest? Is it available as a tool for the community, or we have to go the hard way or collaborate with you to use it, or?
So it's, I wanted to make it available, and I have difficulties to get Pierre. Pierre, are you on? I've seen you to get Pierre putting the script. So yes, this will come. It's not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you everybody, and let's meet again tomorrow morning at 8:30. Goodbye.
Bye.